it's a true novelty. This is something that's happening, and we also wanted to bring attention to this phenomenon with this book. This is something fairly new that's happening in New York, right before our eyes. And it's a direct consequence of this new migration of young people like yourself, people from their early 20s, 30s, who are creating a new kind of literature here in this city. And with all these connections, transnational connections with their country's origin, and creating new connections. Because once you come here from Colombia, from Ecuador, from Argentina, you meet with people from other parts, with established New Yorker or New Yorkers or Dominican writers, and so you create new allegiances, new connections, and that's something very enriching for all of us.
We've got 3 questioners left. We are going to end the program on time. What do you think of that? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for hosting such a wonderful event. That's very nice, and especially because, as many of you have mentioned, the demographics of New York is drastically changing. And this question, I think it will be approaching to all of you who do a lot of research. As an organizer and also as a person who tries to be informed about new research coming, I see not so much research speaking about the excluded Latinos and non-Latinos. When I say excluded, I mean those that don't consider themselves as Latinos, the new arriving immigrants that are coming from different parts of Latin America that don't necessarily speak Spanish, have indigenous roots, but is still concentrated in living and working in communities that it's very hard for them to live and work because they don't feel that they are part of it, not even within their own Latino communities. And I say it because I have seen it a lot in Bensonhurst Bay Parkway, where we directly work with Mayan community that are trying to keep their roots, that are trying to teach their kids to speak Mayan or Quiche, right? And not are necessarily adapting to this bigger picture that you say Latinos or Hispanics. I see it a lot within my hometown in the Bronx, right in the Bronx, where I see a large growing migration and population of Ecuadorians that are not necessarily Spanish speakers. They speak Quechua, which is actually happens to be also my native language. So where do you see their future? First, why there is not so much research on this specific topic? And if there is, or any of you happens to know, where do they fit in this bigger picture of Hispanics?
You want to pick up on that? Actually, I included a footnote because you're right. There's a very little research, although there is increasing research, and of course there's much more known about Mixteco or the language of the Mexican immigrants than about Quechua. But although there is Odi Gonzalez, for instance, a poet who writes in Quechua. It's a Bolivian poet who lives in New York, teaches in NYU. Miriam Yataco, who was one of my advisors for this book, is an expert on all these indigenous languages things. I think it's something, again, one thing that immigration has produced, immigration from Latin America, was to concentrate in New York a number of communities of pre-Hispanic language communities, and especially from Mexico, from the Andes region, and it fits because it's also part of what is Latin America, what is to be Latino. And as I said, there's a long tradition of Nahuatl literature, of Quechua literature, and of course that's also part of what is to be Latino or Hispanic, whatever you want to know. But it will also become part of the American mainstream down the road. I mean, once these poets become more established and they have children and there's a community speaking that, of course, that will also be part of this. This is a big hemispheric thing also, and this is another aspect of the book I wanted to highlight with this book, that all this is not just important because it's affecting the notion of what is to be a Latino in the United States, but also because it is affecting the notion of what is to be Latin American. And it's a two-way process.
I just want to say, I mean, it's incredibly vexed to call native indigenous people, Hispanics. It's a vexed thing. But I think native people coming to New York, I mean, you could also say that New York is becoming more native, so that the next volume would be Native New York. You know, and how migration from Latin America, and that's not only happening in New York, it's happening in LA too. I mean, I'm not an expert, but my small contribution to this is that at Caesar, we just developed a track of study on Native American and indigenous studies, which is the first time that it has happened in Colombia. And that we just got a donation to start a speaker series on Native Americans and indigenous, Native American indigenous studies for a 3-year period. And I think perhaps, hopefully, that could contribute to stimulate interest in knowing more about Native New York. Also, Colombia has a language program on Nahuatl. And we're encouraging our students to also learn native languages if we're going to be studying Native American and indigenous cultures. But I would say that it is an extremely interesting phenomena that's going on that I think labels like Hispanic and Latino might obscure some of the tensions and some of the complexities of that relationship that is reproduced here. As I mean, it is in Latin America, and I guess when we also talk about the United States as a country or nation, we're also overlooking that there are many native nations that are in an antagonistic relationship many times with the United States as a nation. So much to do in that field, in that area.
And we have 2 more, and we're close to the end of our time. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you, Claudio. I'm really looking forward to reading the book. As a footnote to what she said, just to give you some more context, I have a good friend who's a vice principal at a school in New Brunswick, and they have the same problem with the indigenous population, migrant workers. They come, the children, they're only there for a couple months, but not only do they not speak English, they don't speak Spanish, but there's no staff that knows how to relate to them. So it's a problem that's, you know, something has to be done about it. And it's push-pull economics, bringing them here, and they don't want to be here. But with regard, I'm in digital marketing. So with regards to the other gentleman who spoke about why do immigrants come here, and just like Claudio, as you said, you know, we look at the numbers, we look at the census that's coming up, everything, the money, everything's based upon population. And the growth in the U.S. Hispanic, the Latino population, over the last couple years is changed, and it's primarily now 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation growth within the country. So the immigrant population isn't growing, it's subsided, as you said, and maybe it comes from other parts, and if it's not going to come from Mexico, that's a big difference, Mexico being so big. Now, with that being said, my question is, or just to get your ideas on, since I'm in digital marketing and I have a 7-year-old daughter, now we are Latinos in 2010, we're going to 2020, 2012, 2015. I mean, it's not 1970 anymore. We're in a situation, in my opinion, where we are, if we're going to be leaders in 2042, then how are we going to act as leaders? Are we going to act like the people that were prejudiced against us? I think there's there's a lot of issues in our community nowadays, but I don't think we speak about what's coming up in the future. And our children live in a different society than the one that we're talking about right now, because our children are living in a multicultural society. In New Jersey, if you go to New Jersey, it's as multicultural as New York. It's amazing. And I just think that children moving forward, I think there's a disconnect between what's going on here and with our children. And with that being said, I wanted to get your ideas. That map, how's that map going to look, you know, in 10, 15 years with our children that are going to be the ones living in there? And how are they going to relate to los chinos, los filipinos, everyone else? Are they going to be standoffish as los blanquitos han sido con nosotros? Are they going to be, you know, and are we fostering that? Are we fostering that? Because we have to be proud of our culture, it's true, but I think we're in a situation now where with the internet, we really have to, you know, learn about others at the same time. So I'd like to get your ideas on those thoughts moving forward. Thank you.
Milagros, Francis, you want to add something to it?
Well, I mean, Corona is certainly an example of some of the ways that can be happening.
It's happening in the classroom. I have another example. It's happening in Queens, where a Dominican little kid learned to eat with chopstick. So it's happening everywhere. you know, like we living in